kind of calcification that contributes to heart disease. What began as a strategy too, strengthened bone can paradoxically weaken the cardiovascular system. Another important piece is how vitamin D3 interacts with parathyroid hormone, the tiny glands in the neck that regulate calcium balance. Under normal circumstances, if vitamin D levels are adequate, parathyroid hormone stays calm and calcium is kept in balance between bone and blood. But with long-term high supplementation, parathyroid hormone can be suppressed too much, and that disrupts the natural rhythm of bone remodeling. Bones are not static structures. They are living tissue constantly broken down and rebuilt. Too much suppression of this cycle can interfere with the healthy turnover needed to maintain bone integrity, making bones brittle rather than resilient. The immune system is another area where long-term vitamin D3 use must be understood carefully. On one hand, vitamin D strengthens innate immunity, helping macrophages and other first-line defenders recognize pathogens. On the other hand, too much of it for too long can shift immune activity towards suppression, increasing the risk of infections that the body might otherwise resist. Research shows that while moderate levels of vitamin D are linked to fewer colds and flu, very high levels maintained for long periods may blunt the immune system's flexibility. It is the classic example of balance being better than excess. Mood and brain function also sit under the influence of vitamin D3. Low levels are associated with depression, cognitive decline, and even increased risk of neurodegenerative conditions. Supplementation has helped many people restore balance and clarity, but again, when taken in high doses beyond what the body naturally maintains, vitamin D can push calcium into brain tissue in ways that are not fully understood. Early studies suggest that long-term high dosing may be linked to calcification of certain brain regions, which could impact cognitive performance. Although the research is ongoing, it highlights the principle that nutrients are not isolated substances. We can endlessly increase without consequences. Another critical point is that vitamin D3 does not work in isolation. It interacts with magnesium and vitamin K2. And if those are missing, long-term supplementation becomes risky. Magnesium is required for the enzymes that activate vitamin D, and without it, even high doses may not function properly. This creates a paradox where a person can have plenty of vitamin D in their blood, but still experience deficiency-like symptoms because the activation process is stalled. And without K2, the calcium absorbed under the influence of D3 has no clear direction. It may not end up in the bones where it belongs. So long-term use of vitamin D3 without considering its partners is like adding more traffic to a road system without traffic lights or signs. Chaos results. It is also important to consider that not everyone processes vitamin D in the same way. Genetic differences affect how receptors respond to it, how enzymes convert it, and how tissues utilize it. Some people may tolerate high intakes for longer periods, while others develop signs of toxicity at much lower doses. This variability makes blanket recommendations dangerous. What is safe for one individual over years may be harmful for another in just a few months. There is also the interaction with medications. People who take certain drugs for high blood pressure, heart disease, or seizures may find that vitamin D3 alters how these medications behave. Over time, this can lead to either undertreatment or increased side effects. Long-term supplementation, therefore, cannot be seen in isolation from the rest of a person's health and lifestyle. Another subtle but important aspect is sunlight. The body naturally makes vitamin D3 when the skin is exposed to ultraviolet rays, but it is never an uncontrolled flood. There are built-in limits. After about 20 minutes of midday summer sun, the skin stops producing more vitamin D. No matter how long someone stays outside, this natural ceiling prevents overdose. With supplements, that ceiling disappears. Long-term daily intake can keep pushing levels higher and higher beyond anything nature intended. That is why problems like hypercalcemia, kidney stones, and arterial calcification are largely seen with supplementation, not with sunlight. Even the bones themselves, which are the supposed beneficiaries of vitamin D3, can suffer if balance is not respected. When vitamin D pulls too much calcium into the blood, and if there is not enough magnesium to help guide it, or enough K2 to deposit it correctly, the skeletal system can become overloaded with mineral deposits that reduce bone flexibility. Bones need both strength and elasticity to resist fracture. Without elasticity, they become like chalk, strong in appearance, but fragile under stress. So the long-term use of vitamin D3 is a double-edged sword. On one side, It has undeniable benefits when levels are low. It can restore vitality, strengthen immunity, lift mood, and prevent fractures. On the other side, when taken in high doses over years without balance, it can strain kidneys, harden arteries, suppress hormones, and distort the natural rhythms of bone health. The difference between medicine and poison often comes down to dose and duration. When we shift attention to vitamin K2, the picture changes from what most people assume about vitamins. It is often confused with vitamin K1, the nutrient linked with blood clotting found in leafy greens. But K2 is different, working quietly in the background to control where calcium goes in the body. Calcium is like cement, vital for strength and structure, but dangerous if it piles up in the wrong places. Vitamin K2 acts as a traffic director, guiding calcium away from arteries and soft tissues and steering it into bones and teeth where it belongs. Without this guidance, calcium can become a silent hazard, building up in arteries, stiffening blood vessels, and undermining cardiovascular health even while bones weaken. The mechanism is elegant. Vitamin K2 activates specific proteins, particularly osteocolin and matrix GLA protein. Osteocolin binds calcium and integrates it into the bone matrix, making the skeleton denser and more resilient. Matrix GLA protein, on the other hand, works in blood vessels, preventing calcium from depositing along artery walls. These proteins remain inactive without vitamin K2. Long-term deficiency means they never switch on, leaving calcium free to wander and settle where it causes harm. This is why populations with higher intake of K2, such as those consuming traditional foods rich in it like natto or certain aged cheeses, often show lower rates of fractures and less arterial calcification compared to populations with low K2 intake. Yet, in modern diets, vitamin K2 is scarce. Industrialized food systems, reduced consumption of fermented foods, and limited intake of grass-fed animal products have created a widespread quiet deficiency. When people add vitamin D3 supplements without pairing them with K2, the imbalance becomes more pronounced. Vitamin D3 increases calcium absorption, pulling more of it into the bloodstream. But if there is not enough K2 to guide it, the risk of calcium landing in arteries instead of bones rises dramatically over years. This can contribute to stiffened blood vessels, hypertension, and an elevated risk of cardiovascular events. The very nutrient meant to protect health can inadvertently set the stage for disease when balance is ignored. Research supports this interaction. Long-term observational studies have found that individuals with higher dietary intake of K2, necessarily K1, have significantly lower risks of arterial calcification and heart disease. The difference is not small. It can be striking, showing that K2 plays a protective role against the slow, silent buildup of calcium in the vascular system. At the same time, bone mineral density tends to be higher in people with better K2 status, and the risk of hip fractures is reduced. This dual effect, protecting both arteries and bones, illustrates how central K2 is to calcium economy. Another fascinating aspect is how K2 influences dental health. The same osteocolin protein activated by K2 is critical in directing minerals into the teeth, helping them remain strong and resistant to decay. Traditional diets rich in K2 often correlated with lower rates of cavities long before modern dentistry intervened. This is one more example of how the body uses K2 to make sure minerals are deposited in places that sustain long-term health rather than undermine it. The story of long-term use of vitamin K2 as a supplement is generally positive, but there are nuances. Unlike vitamin D3, toxicity from K2 is rare, even with long-term use. The body seems to tolerate higher amounts without the same risks of overload. However, that does not mean there are no concerns. People taking blood-thinning medications like Waririn or other vitamin K antagonists must be cautious because K2 directly affects the clotting pathway. Overdose supplementation could interfere with their medication's intended effects. This does not mean K2 is harmful in itself, but it highlights the importance of context. What benefits one person could complicate another's medical treatment. There is also the matter of balance within the family of vitamin Ks. K1 and K2 share some overlapping roles, but their distribution in the body differs. K1 is sent primarily to the liver, ensuring clotting factors are made. K2 travels to bones, vessels, and tissues. When intake is skewed heavily toward K1 without enough K2, calcium control falters over decades, This imbalance may be one of the hidden drivers behind the paradox of populations with adequate vitamin K intake still suffering from widespread heart disease and osteoporosis. Another layer comes from the different forms of K2. There are short chain mannikones like MK4 and long chain ones like MK7, MK8, and MK9. MK4 is found in animal products such as butter, egg yolks, and organ meats. MK7 is abundant in fermented soybeans, especially natto, and is known for its longer half-life in the body, meaning it stays active longer. Long-term supplementation with MK7 has shown particular promise because of this sustained activity, allowing for steadier calcium regulation. MK4, while shorter acting, still plays critical roles, especially in tissues like the brain and pancreas. The body seems to benefit from both, but most supplements emphasize MK7 due to its stability and convenience. When considering the long-term picture, one must also examine the interplay between vitamin K2 and aging. As people age, calcium regulation naturally weakens. Arteries tend to stiffen, bone density declines, and fracture risk increases. Long-term deficiency of K2 accelerates this decline. Studies have shown that older adults with better K2 status tend to maintain more flexible arteries and stronger bones compared to those with low intake. This suggests that K2 may not only correct imbalances, but slow down the processes of aging linked to mineral mismanagement. The brain also appears to have a relationship with vitamin K2. It is involved in the production of certain sphingolipids, a class of fat molecules critical for the structure and function of brain cells. Over long periods, insufficient K2 may contribute to neurological decline, while adequate intake supports memory and cognitive health. This is an area still being explored, but the potential of K2 to influence both physical and cognitive aging makes it an especially intriguing nutrient when thinking about long-term safety and effectiveness. What becomes clear when examining the long-term use of K2 is that it is not a luxury nutrient, but a foundational one. For decades, it was overlooked, hidden under the shadow of vitamin K1 and its role in clotting. But as research has deepened, it has become obvious that K2's role in calcium management is just as vital and perhaps even more relevant to modern chronic health issues. Its deficiency does not cause immediate symptoms in the way scurvy emerges from vitamin C deficiency, but instead creates slow, silent shifts in the body that over years turn into osteoporosis, arterial stiffness, dental decay, and frailty. Supplementation over the long term appears safe for most people with fewer concerns about toxicity compared to many other fat-soluble vitamins. Its safety profile is strong, but its effectiveness depends on context. How much vitamin D3 is being taken, whether magnesium is sufficient, whether the diet supplies any naturally occurring K2, and whether medical conditions or medications alter its metabolism. It is in the synergy with other nutrients that K2 reveals its full importance. When the conversation turns to magnesium, what emerges is the story of a mineral that touches nearly every part of human physiology, yet remains underappreciated. Unlike vitamin D3 or K2, which often make headlines, magnesium quietly operates in the background, driving over 300 enzymatic reactions that keep the body's systems humming. It is required for energy production, for the activation of muscles and nerves, for the synthesis of DNA and RNA, and for the stability of cell membranes. Without it, the machinery of life does not run smoothly. The importance of magnesium is not dramatic in the way that a single deficiency disease might announce itself, but instead reveals itself through subtle dysfunctions that accumulate over years. Magnesium acts as a counterbalance to calcium, and this balance is perhaps one of its most important roles. Calcium is responsible for contraction, whether in a muscle fiber or in the signaling of a nerve. Magnesium is responsible for relaxation. When calcium floods a muscle cell, contraction occurs and magnesium allows that cell to let go. The heart relies on this rhythm with every beat. Blood vessels rely on it to expand and contract. Nerves depend on it to fire and reset. When magnesium is consistently low, the balance tips, leading to cramping, twitching, irregular heart rhythms, and constricted blood vessels that raise blood pressure. Over time, this imbalance contributes to cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and elevated risk of sudden cardiac events. Magnesium is also indispensable in the metabolism of vitamin D. The enzymes that convert vitamin D from its inactive to its active form depend on magnesium as a coactor. Without it, vitamin D supplementation cannot be fully utilized. People may take high doses of vitamin D3 for years and still struggle with low activity at the cellular level. simply because their magnesium status is inadequate. This relationship underscores how no nutrient operates alone. Long-term use of D3 without sufficient magnesium can create a hidden depletion that eventually undermines the very benefits people are seeking. The nervous system is particularly sensitive to magnesium status. This mineral calms electrical activity, moderates neurotransmitter release, and stabilizes the brain signaling pathways. Deficiency contributes to anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and even migraines over long periods. Low magnesium intake can prime the nervous system for heightened stress responses, overactive excitatory signaling, and vulnerability to depression. Supplementation can restore calm, improve sleep, and reduce the frequency of headaches. But again, balance matters. Excessive long term supplementation, particularly in individuals with kidney impairment, can allow magnesium to accumulate to unsafe levels, leading to confusion, weakness, and in severe cases, cardiac irregularities. Another area where magnesium exerts a long-term influence is in glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity. It is a coactor for enzymes that help move glucose into cells, and it stabilizes insulin's function. Populations with low magnesium intake show higher rates of type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. Over years, this resistance plays out as a gradual increase in blood sugar, insulin resistance, and eventually full-blown diabetes. Adequate magnesium intake, whether through diet or supplementation, has been shown to lower this risk. For people already living with diabetes, it can improve control, reduce complications, and support cardiovascular health. The connection between magnesium and metabolic stability is one of the clearest examples of how long-term nutritional balance translates into long-term health outcomes. Bones also rely on magnesium, though it is often overshot, dowered by calcium, vitamin D. Roughly 60% of the body's magnesium is stored in the skeleton. It not only helps regulate calcium deposition, but also contributes directly to bone architecture. Without enough magnesium, bones become brittle and less resistant to stress. Over decades, inadequate intake accelerates osteoporosis and fracture risk, even in the presence of sufficient calcium. This is why long-term strategies for bone health must include magnesium alongside D3 and K2. Ignoring it creates a structural weakness that no amount of calcium fortification can truly repair. Magnesium's role in the cardiovascular system goes beyond muscle relaxation. It influences lipid metabolism, helps regulate blood clotting, and supports the electrical stability of the heart. Low levels have been linked to higher risks of arrhythmias, atherosclerosis, and stroke. Long-term supplementation at appropriate levels can reduce blood pressure, improve endothelial function, and keep arteries more flexible. Yet, the relationship is dose dependent. In moderate amounts, magnesium protects. In extreme, unmonitored amounts, especially in those with compromised renal clearance, it may create its own set of cardiovascular challenges. The kidneys normally excrete excess magnesium efficiently, but when their function declines, the mineral can accumulate silently over time. Another striking dimension of magnesium is its influence on energy. Every molecule of ATP, the body's cellular energy currency, must be bound to magnesium to become biologically active. Without this partnership, energy cannot be transferred or utilized effectively. Over years, low magnesium can translate into chronic fatigue, weakness, and reduced resilience against physical or emotional stress. Athletes often notice performance and recovery improve with adequate magnesium intake, and older adults often report greater vitality when deficiencies are corrected. This is not a superficial effect, but a reflection of magnesium, M's foundational role in the chemistry of energy itself. Sleep is another area shaped by magnesium's long-term presence. Its calming influence on the nervous system, its ability to regulate melatonin, and its role in muscle relaxation combine to promote restorative rest. Over years, low magnesium intake contributes to insomnia, restless legs, and non-refreshing sleep. This lack of quality rest ripples through every system, weakening immunity, disrupting hormones, and accelerating aging. Correcting magnesium intake is one of the simplest ways to restore healthier sleep patterns. Yet, it is often overlooked until symptoms become severe. Dietary changes over the last century have left many populations chronically low in magnesium. Refining grains strips away the mineral-rich outer layers. Processed foods contain little magnesium. Even soil depletion has reduced the magnesium content of fruits and vegetables compared to previous generations. As a result, long-term subclinical deficiency has become widespread. People may not develop acute symptoms, but live for decades with slightly inadequate levels that slowly erode resilience. Supplementation helps, but only when done with awareness of balance. High doses of magnesium oxide, for instance, may cause digestive upset and be poorly absorbed. More bioavailable forms like citrate, glycinate, or malate are better tolerated for long-term use. Magnesium also interfaces with mental health in ways that reveal its long-term importance. It modulates NMDA receptors in the brain, preventing overstimulation that can damage neurons. Chronic deficiency is associated with excitotoxicity, a process that wears down brain cells and contributes to neurodegeneration. Populations with higher magnesium intake show lower risks of depression and cognitive decline over decades. Maintaining sufficient magnesium may therefore protect not just the beast, body, but also the clarity of the mind. The immune system also leans on magnesium for proper function. It supports the production of antibodies, modulates inflammation, and ensures that immune cells, when these three nutrients are considered together, the picture becomes far more compelling than when they are examined in isolation. Each has its own distinct role, but the true power lies in their synergy. Vitamin D3 increases calcium absorption from the intestines, bringing more of this essential mineral into the bloodstream. Vitamin K2 acts like a traffic officer, directing that calcium to bones and teeth while keeping it out of arteries and soft tissues. Magnesium oversees the system from behind the scenes, enabling the enzymes that activate vitamin D, calming the overexcitement of calcium and ensuring muscles and nerves can respond appropriately. When they are in balance, the trio forms a tightly coordinated team that strengthens bones, protects the cardiovascular system, supports the nervous system, and sustains long-term vitality. When one member of this trio is missing or deficient, problems begin to surface. Imagine vitamin D3 working alone. It pulls calcium into the bloodstream, but without K2, that calcium may settle in blood vessels or kidneys, leading to stiffness and stone formation. Without magnesium, vitamin D may not activate efficiently, leaving a paradox of high blood levels but low cellular effectiveness. This is why people sometimes report taking vitamin D for years, yet still experience symptoms of deficiency or develop complications from excess calcium. The same is true if K2 is supplied. Without D3, the proteins it activates may be ready to guide calcium, but if absorption is insufficient, there's not enough raw material for building bone. And magnesium taken without the others may calm muscles and aid energy production, but will not achieve its full potential in supporting mineral balance unless the other two are present over the long term. The harmony among D3, K2, and magnesium is most visible in bone health. Bones are not static, they are constantly being broken down and rebuilt. This remodeling depends on osteoblast and osteoclast, two types of cells working in rhythm. Vitamin D provides the calcium influx. K2 ensures osteocalin binds that calcium into the bone matrix, and magnesium provides structural integrity and prevents brittleness. Together, they build bones that are both strong and flexible. Without this balance, bone density may appear normal on a scan, while the internal architecture is fragile, leading to fractures from minor falls or stress. The cardiovascular system also reveals the power of synergy. Calcium can be a friend or foe to arteries, depending on its placement. With D3 alone, arteries may silently accumulate calcium deposits over years, stiffening and narrowing until symptoms appear. Add K2 and that calcium is steered away from the vascular walls. Add magnesium and the blood vessels remain relaxed and resilient, resisting the pressure that leads to hypertension. The three together form a network of protection against the slow buildup of calcification that underlies many cases of heart disease and stroke. Populations with higher combined intake of these nutrients consistently show better cardiovascular outcomes than those relying on one alone. The nervous system is another area where their cooperation plays out. Vitamin D influences neurotransmitters, mood regulation, and nerve growth. Magnesium stabilizes electrical activity, prevents overstimulation, and calms stress responses. K2 contributes through its role in sphingolipids, molecules that form part of nerve cell membranes. When all three are in balance, the brain functions with clarity, resilience, and stability. Over decades, this translates into reduced risk of cognitive decline, lower incidence of depression, and greater resistance to the wear and tear of chronic stress. Metabolism and energy production also depend on this trio. Vitamin D influences insulin secretion and glucose control. Magnesium ensures insulin functions properly, and energy molecules activate, and K2 supports pancreatic health. In the absence of one, the system falters. Long term imbalances can lead to metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and energy instability. Balanced together, these nutrients improve insulin sensitivity, stabilize blood sugar, and allow cells to produce and use energy efficiently. This cooperative effect explains why deficiencies in any one of them often manifest as fatigue, weakness, or metabolic dysfunction. Even at the cellular level, their synergy is profound. Vitamin D's hormonal role requires enzymes that are magnesium dependent. K2's activation of proteins is amplified when vitamin D is adequate. Magnesium's stabilizing influence on calcium becomes critical when D3 increases calcium absorption. Every link connects back to the others, forming a circle that is only complete when all three are present. Over years, the presence or absence of this circle determines whether health remains stable or begins to erode in subtle but significant ways. The interplay also touches dental health. Calcium alone will not guarantee strong teeth if it is deposited in the wrong places. With D3, calcium absorption improves with K2. Osteocalin ensures it strengthens enamel and dentin. And with magnesium, the structure is maintained. Traditional diets rich in these nutrients showed lower rates of cavities and jawbone deterioration, a pattern now being revisited in modern research. In terms of aging, this trio acts like a protective shield. Aging often brings loss of bone density, stiffening arteries, reduced muscle function, and cognitive decline. Each of these processes is tied to calcium mismanagement, energy instability, and reduced regenerative capacity. But by working together, D3, K2, and magnesium slow these processes. Bones stay stronger, arteries remain more flexible, muscles function more smoothly, and the brain maintains sharper function. The cumulative effect is not just the absence of disease, but the preservation of quality of life over decades. Importance of synergy becomes especially clear when considering supplementation trends. Many people take vitamin D3 in high doses because it is widely promoted, but fewer realize the importance of pairing it with K2 and magnesium. This creates a one sided approach that may bring short term benefits but pose long term risks. Without K2, arterial calcification may increase. Without magnesium, vitamin D remains underutilized and calcium causes strain. Long term use of these supplements must therefore be considered as a system rather than isolated pills. The same principle applies to diet. Fermented foods, leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and fatty fish each provide components of the system, and traditional diets often supply them in combination rather than isolation. Modern habits of separation and refinement have created gaps that only supplementation can attempt to fill. The immune system also demonstrates this synergy. Vitamin D activates immune defenses and regulates inflammation. Magnesium supports antibody production and moderates inflammatory signals, and K2 contributes to proper cellular communication. The result is an immune system that is neither overactive nor sluggish but balanced. Over decades, this balance reduces the risks of chronic inflammatory diseases, autoimmune conditions, and infections that take a greater toll with age. What makes this trio especially interesting is how it illustrates the principle that nutrients rarely act alone. They are part of complex networks, and their effects are determined not just by their presence, but by their relationship to one another. Long term supplementation with one without regard for the others is like strengthening one link of a chain while ignoring the rest. The strength of the chain is determined by its